The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across my father's front yard before I even stepped out of the black SUV. For one impossible second, nobody noticed me. Every pair of eyes was fixed on my 72-year-old father standing beside the old white mailbox, his weathered hands pulled behind his back, while two private security contractors, hired by the HOA, held him as though he were a dangerous criminal. My father's face wasn't angry, it was confused. "I've lived on this land for 46 years, he kept saying, his voice shaking. "You're making a terrible mistake." The HOA president, Melissa Davenport, stood several feet away, wearing an immaculate navy blazer and oversized sunglasses, despite the cloudy afternoon. A thick folder rested against her hip, as if it contained absolute authority. "You were warned," she said coldly. "You ignored multiple notices. This property is now under HOA enforcement." My father looked straight at her. "There is no HOA on this road," she smiled. "There is now." Neighbors lined both sides of the street. Phones were already recording. Some whispered. Some laughed. Others simply watched without saying a word. I had been away for nearly a week, traveling with a federal task force after completing a high-profile operation. The convoy escort dropping me home wasn't for show. It was standard procedure after recent threats connected to my work. As my SUV rolled toward the house, the lead vehicle slowed. The driver frowned. "Something's wrong." Before I answered, I saw my father's knees buckle. One of the guards jerked him upright by the arm. "Easy," the guard snapped. "He's 72, I shouted before the vehicle had fully stopped. Every head turned. Melissa's confident smile didn't disappear. Instead, she looked irritated that someone had interrupted her performance. "And who exactly are you?" she asked loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. I stepped forward without answering. Behind me, 3 government SUVs came to a stop in perfect sequence. The doors opened almost simultaneously. Several sharply dressed federal agents stepped out, scanning the scene with practiced precision. The street fell silent. One neighbor slowly lowered his phone. Another whispered, "Who are those people?" Melissa glanced at the convoy, then back at me, forcing a nervous laugh. "This is an HOA matter," she said. "Whoever you brought won't change anything." I looked at my father, still standing in handcuffs, then I looked back at her. "You've made the biggest mistake of your life." Melissa folded her arms. "I seriously doubt that." She had no idea who I was. More importantly, she had no idea what had really happened to this neighborhood before she ever became HOA president. "My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've lived with 2 completely different worlds colliding every day. One world was my job, the other was home. The job demanded silence, long absences, and decisions that could change lives in seconds. I couldn't talk about most of it even with the people I loved. Home, on the other hand, was the one place where none of that mattered. It was where I became just a son, instead of someone carrying a government badge. Our property sat just outside Cedar Ridge, Colorado, tucked against rolling hills where the pavement slowly gave way to gravel roads and open fields. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't worth millions, but to my family, it was priceless. My grandfather bought the land after returning from Vietnam. Every fence post, every oak tree, every weathered board on the old red barn had a story attached to it. My father spent decades maintaining the property himself. Even after my mother passed away 6 years earlier, he refused to leave. "This place remembers her," he'd tell me while sitting on the porch every evening. "As long as I'm here, she's still home." Whenever my work allowed, I'd drive back and spend weekends helping him repair fences, cut firewood, or simply sit in silence watching the sunset disappear behind the mountains. Those quiet weekends reminded me why I fought so hard to protect people I'd never meet. Life in our neighborhood had always been simple. Everyone knew everyone. Mr. Wallace down the road still left fresh vegetables on our porch every summer. The Henderson twins mowed lawns for extra spending money. If someone needed help replacing a roof, half the neighborhood showed up with toolboxes before sunrise. Nobody talked about homeowners associations because there wasn't one. At least, there hadn't been. About 8 months before everything exploded, expensive construction equipment appeared on vacant land about a mile away. Within weeks, dozens of luxury homes started rising where open pasture had once stretched across the valley. Dad noticed it before I did. "Developers," he muttered one afternoon while we watched bulldozers from the porch. "They never stop with the houses." At first, It didn't seem like our problem. Then strange things started happening. Bright orange survey stakes appeared along our fence line without warning. Someone tied laminated notices to our front gate, claiming they represented a newly organized neighborhood association. Dad laughed the first time he read one. They've got the wrong address. He tossed it into the trash. A week later, another notice arrived, then another. Each one sounded more demanding than the last. They mentioned architectural compliance, landscaping standards, mandatory assessments, and fines that increased every 30 days. I called the county clerk's office while Dad listened on speaker. The woman searched every public record she could find. "I don't see your parcel listed in any homeowners association," she finally said. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was only the beginning. 3 days later, as Dad watered the garden just after sunrise, a black luxury SUV rolled slowly into our driveway. It stopped. The driver's door opened. A sharply dressed woman stepped out holding a leather binder, smiled as though she already owned the place, and walked toward my father without introducing herself. The woman stopped just short of the porch steps and looked around our property with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone conducting an inspection rather than visiting another person's home. "Good morning," she said, offering a practiced smile. "I'm Melissa Davenport, president of the Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." My father set the watering hose down. "I think you've got the wrong house." Melissa opened her leather binder without acknowledging what he'd said. "Actually, Mr. Carter, we've sent you several notices regarding your property's non-compliance." Dad folded his arms. "My property's not part of your HOA." She flipped through several pages. "Our legal department disagrees." "I'd like to see that." "You'll receive copies after today's inspection." "There won't be an inspection." For the first time, her smile faded. "I'm afraid this isn't optional." She started walking toward the barn. Dad stepped sideways, blocking her path. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you don't have permission to be on my land." Melissa looked over her shoulder toward the SUV. Two men wearing polo shirts embroidered with the HOA's logo climbed out carrying tablets and cameras. "Please document everything," she instructed. One of the men raised his camera. Dad held up a hand. "I said no." Melissa sighed dramatically. "Mr. Carter, your refusal to cooperate will only increase the penalties." "What penalties?" "Unauthorized fencing." Dad laughed. "I built that fence 20 years ago. Unapproved exterior paint. The barn has been red since before you moved here. Improper landscaping." "You mean the trees?" "They violate community visibility standards." I listened to every word over the phone. Dad had called me the moment Melissa arrived, and I stayed on the line while driving back toward the county. "Put me on speaker," I told him. He did. "This is Ethan Carter," I said. "Can you explain why you're attempting to enforce HOA rules on property that isn't part of your association?" Melissa didn't hesitate. "Sir, if you have questions, our attorney will gladly answer them. I've already confirmed with the county that our parcel isn't subject to your HOA." She chuckled. "County records are often behind." "They're not. We have updated documentation." "Then email it. I'm under no obligation to discuss legal matters over the phone." She nodded toward one of the men. "Continue taking photographs." Dad reached over and gently lowered the camera. "I asked you to stop." The photographer immediately stepped backward. Melissa's expression hardened. "Don't touch my employee again." I moved his camera. I witnessed physical interference. Dad stared at her in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding." Instead of answering, Melissa pulled out her phone. Within minutes, a sheriff's deputy arrived. The deputy listened patiently as Melissa claimed my father had obstructed an inspection and assaulted one of her inspectors. Dad remained calm. "I never touched the man. Ask him." The photographer looked uncomfortable. "Well, he moved my camera." "Did he strike you?" "No." "Threaten you?" "No." The deputy turned to Melissa. "So what's the issue?" She leaned in confidently. "The issue is that this homeowner believes he's above the rules." The deputy looked back at Dad. "Do you have paperwork showing you're not in the HOA?" Dad retrieved the county parcel documents we'd printed days earlier. The deputy studied them for nearly a minute. Finally, he handed them back. "From what I can see, this property isn't within the association's recorded boundaries." Melissa's face tightened. "That's impossible. It's what's in the county records." For a moment, I thought that would end everything. Instead, Melissa smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent a chill down my spine, even through the phone. She closed her binder. "Very well," she said quietly. "If county records are your defense," she looked directly at my father, "then perhaps it's time those records changed." The line went silent. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Whatever this woman was planning, it wasn't about landscaping anymore. It was about taking our land. Melissa's final words echoed in my head for the entire drive. "Perhaps it's time those records changed." That wasn't the kind of sentence someone used in the middle of a neighborhood dispute. It sounded calculated, like she already knew something the rest of us didn't. The moment I reached the house, Dad handed me every letter the HOA had mailed over the previous 8 months. I spread them across the dining room table beside the county parcel maps, tax records, and the original deed my grandfather had framed decades earlier. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. Then I noticed something strange. Every HOA notice referenced the same parcel number, but the last 2 digits were different from ours. "They're citing someone else's property," I said. Dad leaned closer. "So they've been sending us notices meant for another lot." "I don't think it's that simple." The legal description printed underneath matched neither our land nor the neighboring ranch. It was a combination of both, as if someone had copied sections from different records and stitched them together. That wasn't a clerical error. Someone had built those documents intentionally. The next morning I called an old friend, Daniel Brooks, a real estate attorney I'd met years earlier during a federal fraud investigation. Daniel specialized in property disputes and title litigation. An hour later, he walked into our kitchen carrying a laptop and a thick legal pad. After reading through the notices, he frowned. "I've seen aggressive HOAs," he said, "but I've never seen one invent a legal description." "You think it's fake?" "I think someone wants you to believe it's real." He immediately requested certified copies of every recorded document affecting our parcel over the last 20 years. While we waited, Daniel suggested another step. "Let's talk to the county surveyor." That afternoon we met with Linda Morales, the county's chief surveyor, a woman with nearly 3 decades of experience mapping land boundaries. She overlaid the original subdivision plats with recent development maps. Within minutes, she stopped moving the mouse. "That's odd." "What is?" I asked. She zoomed in. "The developer's newest subdivision ends exactly here." She tapped the screen. "Our property sat just beyond the recorded boundary. Legally," she continued, "your land was never annexed into the subdivision." "So how are they claiming otherwise?" Linda clicked through several digital filings. Then her eyebrows lifted. "Because someone submitted a proposed expansion map 6 months ago. Was it approved?" "No." "Rejected?" She shook her head. "It was withdrawn." Daniel leaned forward. "So there's no recorded expansion?" "None." We all stared at the monitor. Then Linda opened one final file, a scanned copy of the withdrawn proposal. A red stamp across the first page read, "App denied. Insufficient property owner consent." My father's signature appeared on the final page. At least, it looked like his signature. Dad's face went pale. "I never signed that." Daniel compared it to the signature on Dad's driver's license. The differences were subtle, but unmistakable. The loops were wrong. The spacing was uneven. The final stroke slanted in the opposite direction. Daniel looked up slowly. "This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore." He carefully slid the forged document into a folder. "This is evidence of attempted title fraud." Before anyone could say another word, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation. Just a single sentence: "Drop the investigation, or your father will lose a lot more than his land." I read the text message twice before showing it to Daniel. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he quietly took out his phone and photographed my screen. "Don't reply," he said. "Don't block the number either." Dad looked from me to Daniel. "You think it's connected to Melissa?" Daniel chose his words carefully. "I don't know who's behind it yet. But threatening someone who's challenging questionable property documents is a very bad decision." For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw genuine concern in my father's eyes. He wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about me. "This is because of your job, isn't it?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. If this were related to my work, it would look very different. This is about the land." The next morning, Daniel filed requests for every email, permit application, meeting minute, and architectural plan related to the Cedar Ridge Estates expansion. Most of it came through within days. Hundreds of pages, invoices, engineering reports, board meeting minutes, developer correspondence. At first it looked like ordinary paperwork. Then Daniel found a spreadsheet buried inside an email attachment. One column was labeled holdout parcels. Our property was listed at the top. Next to it someone had typed, "Owner refuses to sell. Explore HOA enforcement options." Dad stared at the screen. "So this was never about fences?" Daniel nodded. "It appears not." Another email made things even worse. A representative from the development company had written, "Without the Carter parcel, The planned entrance road cannot meet county design requirements. That single sentence explained everything. Our land wasn't valuable because of the house. It was valuable because every future phase of the luxury subdivision depended on crossing it. Melissa hadn't been trying to collect HOA dues. She had been trying to pressure us into giving up the one parcel standing between the developer and millions of dollars in future sales. Daniel kept digging. Late that evening, he called me into his office. "I think we've found it." On his monitor sat an internal email chain between Melissa and one of the developer's executives. One message stopped me cold. If voluntary acquisition fails, continued violations and escalating fines should increase pressure. Most owners eventually settle. The response came minutes later. "Keep everything unofficial. We don't want discovery showing coordination." Daniel slowly leaned back. They literally discussed avoiding evidence in an email. That wasn't just unethical. It was potentially devastating in court. Word must have spread that we were uncovering documents, because the retaliation began almost immediately. Neighbors who had spoken to us for years suddenly stopped waving. Anonymous online posts accused my father of threatening HOA volunteers. Someone spray-painted "sell or leave" across our front gate overnight. Melissa held a public HOA meeting where she referred to us, without using our names, as obstructionists, preventing community progress. Even though we weren't HOA members, the pressure wasn't just legal anymore. It was psychological, designed to isolate us, to exhaust us, to make us quit. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Daniel filed a civil action seeking a declaration that our property was not subject to the HOA. Damages for fraudulent conduct were supported by the evidence, and preservation of all relevant documents to prevent their destruction. As we organized exhibit binders late into the night, he closed the final folder and looked at me. "They've spent months building their story." He placed the forged signature on top of the evidence stack. "We're going to dismantle it one document at a time." The trial date was set. For the first time since Melissa stepped onto our property, the next move would happen in a courtroom. The county courthouse was already crowded when we arrived. News of the dispute had spread far beyond Cedar Ridge. Reporters stood outside the entrance, hoping to catch a glimpse of the people at the center of what had become one of the county's most talked-about property cases. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing like television dramas. There were no dramatic speeches, no shouting, just quiet tension. Melissa Davenport sat at the defense table, wearing the same polished confidence she'd shown on my father's driveway months earlier. Beside her sat attorneys representing both the HOA and the developer. She never looked at us. Dad leaned toward me. "You ready?" I nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The judge entered, and the courtroom rose. After preliminary matters, Daniel delivered our opening statement. "This case," he began, "is not about landscaping, neighborhood rules, or unpaid assessments. It is about whether private parties may attempt to exercise authority over property they do not legally control, and whether pressure was used in an effort to obtain land from its lawful owners." The defense argued that the HOA had acted in good faith, based on its understanding of subdivision boundaries, and denied any coordinated effort to force a sale. Then the evidence began. The county surveyor testified first. She carefully explained the recorded subdivision plats, the parcel boundaries, and the withdrawn expansion proposal. When Daniel asked the key question, the courtroom grew still. Based on the official county records, was the Carter property ever annexed into the HOA? No. Was it ever legally subject to HOA covenants? No. The answer was clear. The defense tried to suggest there had been confusion during the development process, but the surveyor remained firm. The public records do not support that conclusion. Next came the document examiner. She compared my father's authentic signatures with the signature appearing on the withdrawn expansion paperwork. Using enlarged exhibits displayed in court, she pointed out differences in stroke direction, spacing, letter formation, and pen pressure. "In my professional opinion," she testified, "the questioned signature was not written by Mr. Carter." Melissa shifted uneasily in her chair. Then Daniel introduced the internal emails. The judge reviewed them carefully before allowing portions into evidence. One message referred to our property as a holdout parcel. Another discussed increasing pressure if we refused to sell. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. During cross-examination, Melissa acknowledged sending some of the emails, but insisted they had been taken out of context. She denied directing anyone to fabricate documents or knowingly enforce HOA rules against property outside the association. Daniel's final questions were short. "Mrs. Davenport, before issuing violation notices, Did you personally verify that the Carter property was within the HOA? She hesitated. I relied on information provided to me. So your answer is no? No. Did you ever inform the Carters that the expansion application, including their property, had been denied? No. Did you disclose that your board had discussed acquiring their parcel for the subdivision entrance? No. Daniel returned to counsel table without another word. The silence in the courtroom said more than any argument could. After closing arguments, the judge gathered the exhibits and looked across the courtroom. This matter raises serious questions concerning property rights, the scope of HOA authority, and the conduct reflected in the documentary evidence. He paused. I will recess briefly to review the record before issuing my ruling. The bailiff announced the recess. No one spoke. We all knew the next words from the bench would determine how this story ended. Nearly 40 minutes passed before the courtroom doors opened again. Everyone stood as the judge returned to the bench. The room was silent enough that I could hear the rustle of paper as he arranged his notes. He looked first at Melissa, then at my father. This case concerns the limits of private authority, he began. Homeowners associations may enforce valid covenants against properties that are legally subject to those covenants. They may not impose obligations on property owners outside their lawful jurisdiction. My father quietly exhaled beside me. The judge continued. Based on the recorded plats, county records, and testimony presented at trial, the Carter property is not, and has never been, subject to the Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. A wave of relief washed over me. Judge wasn't finished. He explained that the HOA's enforcement actions against our property were invalid, and entered judgment, declaring that the association had no authority over our land. He also ordered that the improper notices and claimed assessments be withdrawn, and that the association refrain from representing that our property was within its jurisdiction. Melissa stared straight ahead. Her attorneys exchanged quick whispers. Then the judge addressed the evidence surrounding the disputed signature and internal communications. The court has also reviewed evidence suggesting matters beyond the issues necessary to resolve this civil dispute. To the extent appropriate, those materials may be referred to the relevant authorities for whatever action they consider warranted. Daniel gave a slight nod. It was all he needed to hear. When outside the courthouse, reporters immediately surrounded both legal teams. Daniel spoke briefly. This decision reaffirms a simple principle. Property rights depend on law and recorded documents, not assumptions or pressure. Neither Melissa nor the developer's representatives answered questions before leaving with their attorneys. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere in our neighborhood changed dramatically. Neighbors who had avoided us began stopping by again. Several admitted they had been afraid to speak up while the dispute was ongoing. One elderly couple even apologized for believing rumors that we'd been refusing to follow community rules. I should have asked you what really happened, Mr. Henderson said as we stood by the fence one evening. I'm sorry. I shook his hand. It's over. The county also announced a review of subdivision-related filing procedures to reduce the risk of future boundary disputes and improve verification before certain development documents were processed. Life slowly returned to normal. Dad spent his mornings back in the garden. The old barn still stood exactly where my grandfather had built it. The fence Melissa once called unauthorized remained untouched. One evening, Dad and I sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the hills. After a long silence, he smiled. You know, he said, I never cared about winning. I looked at him. I just wanted to make sure nobody could take away what your grandfather worked his whole life to build. I looked across the fields that had belonged to our family for generations. For the first time in months, the land felt peaceful again. Not because the fight had never happened, because we had finally proven that some things are worth defending. Several months have passed since the courtroom doors closed behind us, but every time I drive down that familiar gravel road, I still slow down as I reach the old mailbox. It's the same mailbox where I first saw my father standing in handcuffs. Today, there's no crowd, no arguments, no flashing cameras, just quiet fields, a weathered red barn, and the front porch where my father drinks his morning coffee as the sun rises over the hills. Life didn't magically become perfect after the lawsuit. We still had repairs to make, fences to mend, and memories to work through. But one thing had changed forever. We no longer lived with the fear that someone could simply invent authority and expect us to surrender what generations of our family had built. The experience taught me something I'll never forget. People who abuse power often count on one thing: that you'll become exhausted before the truth is uncovered. They hope you'll choose the easy path instead of the right one. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't raising your voice. It's refusing to give up. If this story resonated with you, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or someone who tried to intimidate you into giving up something that was rightfully yours? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else facing a similar challenge. If you enjoyed this fictional HOA drama and want more stories filled with suspense, legal battles, unexpected twists, and satisfying endings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Until the next story, take care of the people you love, stand up for what's right, and remember, the truth may take time, but when it finally arrives, it has a way of speaking louder than intimidation.